This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, not burdened with duties, and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be happy. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be happy. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding, by not holding to false views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Okay, well, tonight one of the things that might be interesting to talk about is sanctuary and freedom. Because these two things, I think, are very important in today's world. Perhaps they've always been important, but perhaps more than ever now. And one of the things to consider about what a sanctuary is, which is really interesting, is actually a subtle thing about people that we kind of is obvious, but we never actually consider. And that is, we like boundaries. We like enclosures. So we might enjoy the vastness of the wilderness. We might enjoy standing on top of a mountain or at the edge of a cliff looking over a great canyon or over the ocean and everything else, and might be inspired and everything else. But there's a little voice in the back of our minds going, this is all very nice, but can we please go back inside now? And that's a very, very interesting thing. We like to be inside. We like to be enclosed with walls and boundaries. Even our idea of heaven, when we think about it, in the Western idea, it's got the pearly gates. The idea of heaven in the Middle East is often a walled garden filled with fruit trees and flowering plants and flowing water. So many of these ideas of what we consider as paradise are enclosed spaces. And at the same time, the vastness of the openness, of the emptiness, of selflessness, is actually a little scary to us. It's something which we like to talk about a lot as Buddhists, but deep, deep down, we kind of find it scary. We kind of find it uncomfortable to talk about a vast mind. And that is because the ego hates a vacuum. It needs to fill space up. It needs to feel determined. It needs to feel everything in place. And that's the only way it can feel safe and protected. And that's interesting from a Buddhist point of view, because a lot of that is actually baked into the structure of how we practice. And that does include the 5 precepts, because they give us boundaries, they give us a sense of direction, how we're supposed to live in the world. But at the same time, boundaries can be a prison. They can be a fortress. They can be a horrible place to live in. They can actually reduce our freedom. So that's where the middle way again comes in. We're either loose, being blown about in the wind, or we're being trapped in a tiny little prison. So what is a sanctuary in this? What is freedom? And of course, these are big questions, because this is where it really, really comes together. What is it that we're really looking for? That peace and happiness comes from having a sanctuary inside ourselves, as well as developing it in life generally. This is something which is very, very important. I would venture to say that one of the main problems people have in their lives, one of the main reasons we have such serious mental health case so pervasive in society around the world, is that people just don't feel safe inside themselves. They don't have a sanctuary inside themselves. They're not, as the Buddha says, to make themselves an island of which no flood, no tsunami will wash over. And that's a really big idea. To make yourself free by being something that is no longer subject to the whims of life, but to be able to accept them. And that's okay. And in a monastic sense, sanctuary is kind of built in as well. So when a woman leaves home to become a nun, to become a bhikkhuni, she leaves to her monastery, and that monastery is designed to be a safe place for women. In that particular case, when she becomes a nun, she gives up a lot of these gender roles that she's now free from having to cook, to clean, to be the mother, to be the parent, to run around after people. She doesn't have to worry about all these things. And in her community, she's free there in her sanctuary. And it's the same for the monks. The monks have their sanctuary as their monastery. And they are free from their gender role of having to be the breadwinners, the fixers, the providers. We don't have to be involved in this anymore because we've given up money and property. So on that level, we're free from that. And that's one of the interesting things in the world today. We don't think about what sanctuary is. For many people, monasteries are like a theme park. They're just a place that you go and hang out and, yep, this is just the Buddhist thing we do is turn up and everything else. But we've kind of lost how it comes together, the impact it has on us, that you don't have to be a monastic to have a sanctuary. You can have one inside yourself, inside your own home, inside your own apartment, inside your own room. It can be wherever you are. And that all comes down to our relationship with ourselves and our relationship with our environment and our relationship to life itself. Because we never feel safe and protected when we're at war with ourselves, when we're trying to fight ourselves and control that which we cannot control. Or when we're lost in trying to find freedom in endless instant gratification, of which, there's so much promising in the world that buy this, listen to this, join this, etc., and everything will be fine. Well, of course it won't. It never has and it never will. And millions of people are trying this today, and it's still not working. And this is one of the tragedies, is because we don't have that sanctuary inside ourselves, we're looking for happiness somewhere else, outside of ourselves. So many of the younger people are fully plugged into the social media and everything else, which we know has some benefits, but there's a lot of toxicity there as well, a lot of harm and everything else. And yet they can't disconnect from it. They become so used to instant gratification through information, through contact and everything else, they can't disconnect. And if they are at risk of disconnecting, they feel fear because they don't have anything else. And that's a real kind of concern for the future. But it's also something that can be remedied. We can teach ourselves and we can teach each other how to feel safe and protected within ourselves by living a good life. Because that's a major thing, that's part of it. When we have a good relationship with ourselves, there's a high amount of inner trust. And that trust comes from inner strength, which again comes back to the precepts, because all of a sudden we have guidelines. So the mind can trust us. Oh, thank goodness I'm not going to run off and do something silly that I'm going to be ashamed of for the rest of my life. We have these checks and balances that protect us, and by the same token, we protect each other. And we feel safe with each other in that way. When it is something we feel instantly, when you're with a good person, a person who is not necessarily oppressive or authoritarian with their rules and precepts and are taking this harsh dogmatic approach, but this life of kindness and looking to live life in the best way we can, to investigate, to experiment, to explore, to try new things, to be inventive and creative, and all these words which unfortunately have almost turned into cliches now, but all these things which have always been there for us, these opportunities. And so coming to find that sanctuary, often it's very hard at the beginning because we've had such a lousy relationship with ourselves. We sit in meditation, which again should be another sanctuary for us, and yet for many of us, straight away start thinking, trying to escape, trying to run away, can't stay with the present moment, we want to get away from the present moment, any distraction will do, and our chance of having sanctuary is gone. And this is one of the interesting things. By developing that sanctuary, it's very, very easy to let go because it's no longer a control fight. We're constantly trying to control in order to feel safe, in order to feel that we are doing this and it's okay. But at the same time, in trying to control, we're bringing in tension, we're bringing in anxiety, we're bringing in all kinds of complexities and tension and everything else that just basically give us a horrible time on the cushion. And when you have a horrible time on the cushion, you feel miserable meditating and you feel miserable doing everything else, which is a real tragedy. And so in that particular way, we can actually change our approach to things. We can find a sanctuary in our meditation in the breath, or whatever your meditation object is. If it's a mantra, if it's an emotion, if it's looking at a flower or a candle flame or whatever it is that you're practicing, that can be a sanctuary in and of itself because you're perfectly happy to be there. And so when we look at what a sanctuary is, we kind of have to ask, well, where do we start? If we start meditating and we just feel lost straight away, where's our point of reference? What do we come back to? And the easiest approach for this is really kind of individual. What feels best for you? Are you drawn to loving kindness kind of meditations? Are you drawn to mantra types? What are you drawn to? What do you feel most comfortable doing? What kind of uplifts and inspires you? Perhaps it's reflecting on the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha and things like that. You always look for something that draws the mind in a positive direction. Even if it's just another one is recollecting the good things you've done or the good things other people have done. Finding joy, finding happiness. All these little things. One of these will be like a magnet to you. Maybe a few. But for most people it's usually just one to begin with. And that's why having a fixed approach to meditation can actually backfire on us. Because if we're trying to have this technique-orientated system where it's very rigid and narrow and it must be like this, that's boring. That is miserable because we're putting in a boundary that has now become an imprisonment. It is not a boundary that is just giving us a safe space in which to live, in which to breathe, in which to sit. And that's where the subtlety comes in. So all of a sudden when we look at how these boundaries work, because for each other, respecting our own space, respecting each other's space is a fundamental part of what we consider as good etiquette. Even in big cities where you're crammed in because there's no space to have, there's still a degree of etiquette where we don't interfere, we don't intrude, we don't invade in other people's space because it just makes us feel uncomfortable. And so there's a respect for space, which is again another one of these complications that comes up in Buddhism a lot. And that is we like to talk about emptiness. We like to talk about profound things like anatta and all these selflessness and apamana, the boundless states of mind and all these kinds of wonderful things. And yet deep, deep down, that's actually not what we want. Deep down, we're kind of scared of these things. And so there's this conflict of interest that's going to interfere in our practice. And it's going to continue going that way until we start addressing that. And this conflict of interest is basically simple, is that we haven't really experienced yet that emptiness, the spaciousness, the selflessness is peaceful, is joyful, it's blissful, it's relaxing, it's a relief. If we haven't experienced that for ourselves, it will always remain the nightmare of the ego. It will always remain the thing that we're most afraid of, because we haven't experienced it of ourselves. And it doesn't necessarily have to be on the cushion. When we look at the Buddha's practice, it's pretty much all through daily life you can get experiences on that. They're at their best or at their deepest in meditation for sure, but just the simplicity of having a cup of tea, writing poetry or calligraphy or artwork of some kind, doing gardening, cleaning the house, driving, all kinds of things that you can relax but still be engaged with what you're doing, can give you a sense of, because when you're engaged, that's still kind of like a boundary. You're determining what you're doing. It's not being loose where your mind is wandering over the place. So you've got that benefit, which is fundamentally what mindfulness is. Mindfulness gives us direction. It gives us a focus. It determines a space for us. But it's being done in a positive way, not to imprison us, but because being loose like a leaf blown in the wind is painful, it's uncomfortable, it's frightening to many people. And mindfulness centers us. It gives us that point of reference. And so all these things come together, doing good, improving our relationship with ourselves, how we eat, how we sleep, the amount of exercise we get, how, what our environment is like. Are we living in a mess, or are we keeping things tidy in a way that we feel that we have self-respect? And all these things start to come together. And so it's really, really important for that. How do all these things come together? It's just a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here. And yet they all have an effect. Because the more and more we do this, the more and more we build that good relationship with ourselves, the more and more we build a good sanctuary in ourselves, the more the mind trusts us. It trusts us that we're not going to go off and do something crazy. It trusts us that going, okay, we know how to manage this. It's more at ease in situations. It's more confident in situations without it being kind of a brash or arrogant confidence, shall we say an ignorant confidence. But it's an informed confidence, an educated one, because we are focused in what we're doing and we're being intelligent about it, and we're being intelligent with heart at the same time. We're bringing both these things together. And that's what makes Buddhism so incredibly practical, which is kind of one of the tragedies, is that in many traditional forms, it really has been reduced to this ritualistic or technique-orientated, or, basically practice is irrelevant. It's more of a cultural form just to preserve these traditions, and that's the end of it. And we really sell ourselves out that way. Because I think the most effective way to help people as Buddhists, but it's generally in society, is by living a good life. Because other people are drawn to that. When they see someone else is happy, they want a little bit of that. They want to know, how is this person happy? How is this person at ease all the time? How is this person being able to cope and being resilient in all these sometimes terrible and chaotic situations? And that's because they have that good relationship, they have that good foundation, they have that sanctuary in themselves. As I often say to people, and no doubt I've mentioned it in a talk somewhere along the line here, deep, deep down, we look at the world and we see chaos, we see change, we see impermanence, we see everything that anicca covers. And that scares us because we think, oh my, I can't control this. What do I do? And we build up walls, again, an enclosure to feel safe. And when we start to, if we've had a difficult life and we've been around a lot of aggressive people or treacherous people or toxic people, that can become a fortress. And we build ourselves eventually a fortress to feel safe by, again, an enclosure. But that's not a real sanctuary. That becomes a prison. It becomes a place that we're terrified to leave, for fear of our own safety. And yet if anybody comes close, bring out the guns and the boiling oil. That's the response many of us have. And at the same time, some of us prefer a more escapist approach. We feel that we can't manage this anyway, so we build a castle in the sky. We try to build an escape into fantasy, into something else. And again, the young are drawn very much into this kind of escapism. And many of us, we just want something simple. We just want a little home sweet home, some little comfortable place where everything's okay. And that's actually interesting, because if we know the story of the Buddha, one of the first things he said after the enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, he said, "House builder, you have been seen. You will not build any more houses." And that's something really interesting. The Buddha himself is pointing to this. Our attempt to build a home sweet home, to build a castle in the sky to escape to build a fortress is not the answer. But to build ourselves a sanctuary is the answer. As he says, you have to be a refuge to yourself, a sanctuary to yourself, the island of which no flood or tsunami will overcome. And we do that step by step in whatever way it takes. There's no real fixed formula for this. It's all principles, really. It's what works best for you. The problem is, a lot of people, when they hear about Buddhist practice, they say, "Oh, that sounds too hard, I can't do that. Oh, I'm not a monk or a nun, I can't do that." Which is, when you really think about it, is one of the 3 most disempowering things that you can ever believe. The other 2 is that we're already enlightened, therefore we don't need to practice, or I know what Buddhism is about, therefore I don't need to listen to anyone. Those are really the 3 ways that we mess up our lives. But this one is very, very common. This one that, I can't do this is too hard. Oh, I'm so busy, Yeah, we're all busy. Everybody's got cost of living pressures around the world. And this is a global community we have online here at the moment, which is itself amazing. But everybody's struggling. Everybody's got pressures, no matter where we are. At some point, we have to determine within ourselves, we've got to do this or we'll never do it. We've got to start somewhere. And this is what it's all about. Helping ourselves and helping each other get our lives back. To be able to live. Yeah, it might not be perfect, but at least we're giving it a good shot. That's what matters. We've got integrity in what we're doing. That matters. And the amazing thing is that in helping people to get their lives back, it's done by showing people that you've never actually lost your freedom. You never actually lost your sanctuary. That's something that's really incredible. What's happened is we've buried it under so many pressures, under so many beliefs, over so many, what's commonly called conditioning. All these stories and things we believe, our hopes, our fears, our dreams, our pressures, our information overload, being exhausted, all these things that we've never given ourselves time, so we feel stressed all the time. We have our fight or flight response in overdrive. There's no peace and happiness in that. All these instincts and everything else are kicking in a survival mode, and we never give ourselves any time to settle, to relax, to give ourselves a bit of space and openness. We've become too self-protected. It's become a prison. It's become a pressure cooker. We've become restricted. And yet all we need to do is give ourselves some self-respect, give ourselves some TLC sometimes, give ourselves a break and relax sometimes, even if it means just putting on the headphones and going into, I don't know if you've got a spare cupboard or a walk-in wardrobe, or just going into the bathroom and shutting the door and and chilling out for a few minutes. That's fine. Every little bit helps to become more centered, to become more resilient, and to find a foundation, a sanctuary from where we can now find joy in life. Because the more and more that we live a joyful life, the more and more we do good things, the more and more we keep precepts, the less regret we have, the more we can look back positively of how we've lived and are living, the less we're afraid of the future, the less regrets and fears and shame and everything else. We're far more free because we've been able to take a direction for ourselves. And I think that's very important. So, who knows, maybe that's a start. But what is sanctuary? It's a question that not many people even ask. I would venture in the world that, perhaps one of the main reasons there's so much violence in the world is because we don't have a sanctuary. Many people aren't actually allowed to have one. Many groups are forbidden to have them in our society, which is also an interesting thing when we look at it. People aren't allowed to have private space. So there's a lot that we can do for ourselves to empower ourselves. And one of the first most important beliefs that we can give up is the belief that this is too hard, I can't do it. This is too complicated, it will never work. Oh, I might as well give up. That is ultimately one of the most disempowering things we can do to ourselves. A lot of the time we need to have some more self-respect and optimism of how we can live and how we can use what we have to the best it can be. So it's been half an hour. Perhaps we should move into some meditation, perhaps build a sanctuary there. How's that sound? Yep, I'm getting a lot of thumbs up, so that's a good sign. Okay, so as usual, everybody stand up, give yourself a bit of a shake, adjust your clothes as you need to, adjust everything that you need to do, so we can feel a bit more energy, feel a bit more uplift. And doing this helps us actually settle into the chair better, so we actually have more enthusiasm for meditation. I've had you sitting there for half an hour already, so why not? And then when we're ready, let's settle in, and you can close your eyes. And as we settle into our chair, or on the bed or on the floor, try to get a feel of the space that you're in. Whether it's your bedroom or your living room, a safe place, your space, a space where you're comfortable and safe. If you can feel that you're in a sanctuary, in your private space, all we have to do is bring that feeling inside. And as we relax more and more, to feel at ease in our space, in our bodies, and in our minds. Because when we're in a perfectly safe place, we don't need to control. We don't need to be anxious about our meditation. We can breathe in and breathe out and release all that tension, all that anxiety. have some joy just to be here. And as we breathe in and out, let's give ourselves the chance for some peace, for some release, for some rest in a healing space, a healing space within. Spend this time fully engaged in relaxing, in making yourself more comfortable, more settled. The most beautiful gift to yourself. imagine someone that you care about, someone who you're very close to. And imagine them being in your space as a welcome guest. And imagine just wishing that they too can find their own sanctuary, their own happiness within. That they may be safe and protected and happy and successful and free from despair and hopelessness. Imagine giving this person a flower and saying, "Thank you for being in my life, and I wish you all happiness in the world." And see if you can expand your space to include others and to wish them for health and happiness and for success and freedom from despair and hopelessness. And to say, "Thank you for being in my life, and I wish you all happiness in the world." And expand this wish that all people, all beings, may find their sanctuary, may find their way home, so that they can live so they can be free. Okay, when you're ready, you can open your eyes. And welcome back. Okay, and when you're ready, if anybody has any questions, please dive in. Bring it on. Oh, nothing? Come on, surely someone. Oh.
Okay, how are you?
Still alive.
Thank you for a very, very relaxing meditation and talk. Two questions. One, what's the difference between sanctuary and refuge? I mean, I kind of know, but it just popped in my head just now in your last comment. Because we go for refuge to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, but a refuge is like a sanctuary in a way. And a sanctuary doesn't have to be a place, it's a feeling too, because if you don't have a lot of space that you can claim for a sanctuary, then you have to take a sanctuary with you everywhere you go, kind of. Unless you run to the bathroom just hide or something. Nobody can follow you there. And the other thought, I was struggling with reverence. Like, I have a Buddha in my room, and I think it's my conditioning to be rebellious against authority from childhood. But I'm not conditioned like the Thai people, or to have an ultimate reverence for every relic and image of the Buddha. I love the Buddha, but I have also loved Christ in my life, but I want to train myself for reverence, along with the sanctuary and the refuge. Does any of that make sense?
Oh yes, very much so. In a way, the refuge is where we start, because the refuge is kind of externalized. We're taking refuge in the Buddha, in the Dhamma, in the Sangha, as if it's something other. And eventually we bring it back inside and find out that the Dhamma was in us all along, that the peace and the happiness we're looking for, the love, the joy, all these wonderful things were in us all along. And then all of a sudden we don't have to look outside for that refuge. The refuge is within. And the Buddha himself says, ultimately you must be your own refuge. And that's when it becomes a sanctuary. So in a way, they are exactly the same thing, but we have to kind of start from a position of, me stuck in this world going crazy and all these pressures and all these other things and hopes and fears and dreams and da-da-da-da-da. And we have to start somewhere. But ultimately it's coming back to that. So we find that joy and happiness within. With that, interestingly, also comes the next part of your question, because there's a natural feedback mechanism that's part of this process, that when we start to look at how the world is and how many people in it are, they're doing their best for sure, but some of them are suffering so badly that just the reality and the hopelessness and the despair and the depression and the violence and so on and so on and so on, to find that mindfulness within ourselves is something that's almost miraculous. It is something that is so marvelous, so wonderful. It almost kind of like you have to be, someone special to find it, essentially, because not everybody can. And we can build sort of a reverence and a joy for that in recognizing how unique this is, that this is something we could have done all along, but at the same time, nobody had done it until the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree and connected the dots, you could say. The famous story is the Buddha tells of this traveller walking along a path and finds this lost, abandoned kingdom in the jungle. And he looks around and discovers that it's still in good shape, it can be restored. And he can go back and tell people, let's go and do this. And they do. And that's really part of where the reverence comes in, is feeling that joy for how special it is. Because a lot of the time it feels very ritualistic, very empty, because that's how, unfortunately, it's been passed down to us. And for sure, I've got a rebellious streak. I've got, reverence was always very hard for me too. So, yeah, exactly. It's finding that joy and connecting the dot that this is something really special. If reverence kind of comes almost ritualistically, I'm not sure it's the same thing, quite honestly. I think that's more of a faith devotion, which is useful for sure, but it's not a reverence from the heart. Yeah. So hopefully that...
Yeah. I love that quote that, I'm not sure which Bhante or which Ajahn, which Venerable said it, but maybe it was Ajahn Chah, was if you really knew what it meant to bow, you would weep.
Yeah.
And that just gives me goosebumps.
Yeah. That was Ajahn Chah.
So, okay. That was Ajahn Chah, okay. I'm not too far off.
It's one of my favourite ones too.
Yeah, we're kindred spirits there. We come from the same matter. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, is there another one?
Somebody wrote something, Jennifer, to the meeting group. Can you see it?
No.
Venerable?
No, I just have the...
Gloria, is she there?
Yes, I can read it out to you. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
So it was very interesting that Ajahn equates tidiness with self-respect just now. Lately, I had to share space with a very untidy person because because he is in his 80s, quite advanced in age. I just keep quiet as much as I can and not make his untidiness a big issue. But honestly, it is not very pleasant to have to share space with someone untidy. I just try to practice Metta Karuna to diffuse these unpleasant feelings. Any comments?
Part of the issue in this is when people do get older, they no longer, sometimes they don't have the mobility. That's certainly an issue. They're not able to do it. Yeah, they might have arthritis and all issues in their hands. Sometimes also that they're feeling old and depressed in themselves, so they don't have that energy anymore or interest. I've met many people who are also in their 70s, late 80s and things like that, who basically live out of their bags. Their stuff are just scattered all over the place, or they just live out of boxes because they no longer have the motivation to keep their house and their home in a good shape. And that's kind of a thing that happens with older age, is that they start to lose their self-awareness, their self-presence. And that happens naturally. It can be dementia-related. So, of course, we give them the space for that. But within ourselves, it's also tricky. It's better to recognize that what this person is going through. Because if we try to practice metta and the karuna and everything else, it can be a form of enabling. It just is a way to block all this out. Oh, well, let's just practice metta and just forget about it. But deep inside, that actually is not a good way to go. That actually cuts ourselves off, because inside we're not happy with the situation and we're kind of trying to douse it with metta and everything else to make that feeling go away. And that ultimately can backfire. So in this particular case, maybe it's a relative you're living with, or whether it's a housemate or something else, is to separate yourself to an extent to your own living space and their living space, and to try and find a mutual ground together. It's quite a tricky one, this one. It's not a perfect answer. but we have to give it our best
I
shot.
have a deep feeling about this situation. Can I ask a question? I think I don't know the circumstance, of course. Are you forced to live in this house, or is this a relative? But being a consummate caregiver, it would be my instinct just to clean for everybody and don't think about who's dirty, who's clean. If they're 80 years old, they need help. So help the oldest and the sickest person in the room. You know, do it with metta. Do it with karuna. Put rubber gloves on.
Yeah.
That's just a feeling.
Yeah.
Rather than be upset about somebody's untidiness, clean it up. The first time I went into a small Kadampa temple here in Fort Lauderdale, I went into the restroom. It was co-ed, I think, or maybe it was a ladies' room. And when I came out, I said to a lovely lady, I said, "Ooh, there's no toilet paper and it's kind of messy in there." And she just said to me, "Around here, honey, if you see something, why don't you just do it? Otherwise, keep your mouth shut." I don't know, that kind of struck me kind of wonderful and funny. So I went in and cleaned the bathroom.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There is a lot.
Rubber gloves you can clean.
There's a lot to be said for that. A lot of the times, stepping forward in that way is a form of self-empowerment itself, because we're no longer being oppressed with all the stuff around us. We're stepping forward and making a difference, a positive difference in that space. So that's a good one. Yeah. Okay, are there more questions?
Yes, Bhante, I was worried about sanctuary versus putting your head in the sand, because I have not been watching the news. I have totally just stopped finding out what's going on in the world, and I wonder if I'm just sticking my head in the sand.
Well, that can happen. It's a natural response, I think, is that when we're confronted with so much chaos and uncertainty and all the troubles and things that we see in the world, or that we suspect are happening in the world, there are times this can be overwhelming and we don't know how to deal with it. Our natural instinct is to basically switch off, is to disconnect. And in this sense, that's a rational, healthy response. It's okay, because it's where we are at the moment, how we can respond to this in a positive way. So sanctuary is a sense that it's more engaged and it's more aware, but it's also saying that when there are difficulties, we have to stand on our own 2 feet. We have to be present in ourselves so we can think clearly. If we let the world encroach too much on us and we can't handle it, it is oppressive and we block it out. We have to take it in a way, in small healthy doses, in ways that we can process it, but we still have to be informed. Otherwise, basically the world will run us over. So it's a bit of both in a way. It's okay to put your head in the sand when it's a healthy response, because you don't know any other way to deal with the situation. But the goal is to change our response by giving ourselves more skills, more abilities, to empower ourselves more, and to see perhaps opportunities, ways that we can help in society, ways that we can make a positive difference. As the guy said, get the rubber gloves on and let's get in. That's the kind of thing that can be very empowering, because now all of a sudden, yes, we're in a chaotic situation, but we can do something with this. We can move forward. We don't have to be drowning in this. As the Buddha said, we have to make ourselves that island of which no tsunami will overcome. And there's a lot of tsunamis happening at the moment. So, we have to start somewhere. And that starting somewhere might be, okay, we get to higher ground. But then from higher ground, we can say, okay, let's take stock of things, let's move forward. So it's a big thing, but it's okay. So hope that helps. Yeah. Okay, next one.
Thank you, Venerable. I find this exchange super interesting because it fits very well with the situation that I was in not very long ago. Because my mom was what we in Germany call like a messy person. She really stuffed her house completely with everything. She loved books. She was interested in so many things. But it was to an extent where she couldn't move anymore, right? And in one way, she needed that messiness. She needed all that stuff, probably out of some psychological issue, probably also related to her childhood. She needed to be able to, express herself in a certain way. And if we tried to clean out things, she got very aggressive and she was very unhappy, and she immediately started feeling again. Right, so that was not a solution to try to clean for her. I mean, it was very bad for her if somebody took control over her space that she wanted to control, right? At the same time, she also felt not safe, or maybe she felt safe, but she was needing that, she was also looking for a little bit of vastness. And sometimes she would just kind of sleep where she could look out into her garden. So it was this, as it fits so well because you're talking about the refuge and the sanctuary, which was her stuffed house in a way. At the same time, it was the fortress that you're talking about. And I think it was something that in the end, it was very difficult for her because she couldn't reconcile the two things, right? And it was, I don't think I have... it's not really a question necessarily, but just also for Jennifer, that it is possible that this person she's living with needs the messiness. And possibly you need to separate, if you can, yourself from that without cleaning his stuff, because that would probably also mean to, basically trying to take his control. So I'm not sure if there's a way to get out of this. And with my mom, it was very difficult for us because in the end she died and my sister and I had to clean up the house, which was again a huge issue for us. But it's very interesting and not really having a solution, but it's, I would love to hear some thoughts about that problem, that it might be something very deep inside of people, the need to, kind of create mess around them or fill things up to maybe fill a void or something like that, and how we can help them without trying to think that we need to clean for them.
No, this is actually something which is something that I've experienced quite a lot myself. As a child, I associated quite a lot with older people who had been through very, very difficult circumstances, who had very deprived childhood. And in some cases, having that clutter, having all that stuff, to an extent was a compensation. Some of them were collecting dolls, some of them were collecting toys, some of them were collecting papers, just stuff which gave them a sense of, safety in protection. Having all this stuff gave them a sense of meaning. But for exactly at the same time, they couldn't move. They were just trapped with all this stuff and they just couldn't get out. And they wanted to get out, but they just couldn't, and they couldn't bear to lose any of this stuff. And I've known quite a few people in that situation. In fact, one kind of tragic situation I can think of is after this old lady passed away, her children had inherited the property, and all they did is they just chucked all the stuff into a big, dumpster. And I was there watching it, and I was sort of going, but doesn't this stuff mean anything to you? And it's like, no, it's all rubbish to us. But it meant so much to this old person. And this is kind of a thing where it can be a kind of compensation. is that because they were so deprived that they need to kind of keep all this stuff because it's the only thing that gives them a sense of life, of purpose, of being. And there is also, because I've known quite a few people who are avid collectors, there's also the joy of the hunt. It doesn't matter about having the stuff, it's looking for it, it's getting it, it's going to the swap meets and the fairs and the markets and the antique shops and finding all this stuff, which can again be kind of a hobby but also a coping mechanism. So it's very, very valid. Everything you say, I've seen quite a lot myself. So it's quite a difficult one to say. So we do have to try to find where that person's coming from. Yeah. But can a person in that sense actually be free? I think ultimately yes, but it's kind of a point when they've had enough joy from their things that they're ready to let them go. But that, again, that is kind of a progress that they sort of can now sort of see, okay, it's time to move on. But unfortunately, not many people actually do that. The older they get, the more frail they feel, the less able they feel, the less needed or wanted they feel. They feel abandoned, many of the elderly people. They feel irrelevant and impotent, and a whole list of long words we can put in here. You know, many of these people are dumped into old age care homes and forgotten about. So their stuff becomes basically a reminder of who they are. It's like their whole world, their life story encased in front of them, whether it's books or tapes or who knows what it could be. So it's an interesting way how we project outwards. And yet at the same time, when we start coming inwards and we find that joy and happiness and peace inside, then we can still enjoy these things, but they're not that much important to us anymore because they're not filling that hole or that need for us anymore. We've been able to find that sanctuary within ourselves. And in that case, we can be free. But, it's a lot harder for older people and especially for traumatized people. You know, for traumatized people, their stuff is their sanctuary. It's like their teddy bear. You know, try to get young kids away from their teddy bear. It's a painful journey. Yeah. So I hope that helps. It's okay. Next one, please.
Hiya, John.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yep, all good.
Yeah, great. They're working. Thank you for your meditation and the talk. Yes, I think I always said something similar at the end of the group last week where you were like describing, well, it's not just my life, you were describing my life before I got cancer,
Mm-hmm.
which was from why I got cancer, perhaps, who knows, causes and conditions, but the inability to self-soothe, because I was so caught up with stress and work, and I mean for decades, kids, single parent, they're going on and on, and then I had to stop, everything. And what I know, I was thinking this last night, I was thinking, I wonder also if by stopping my coping strategies, which was one was buying stuff, my goodness, I'm going to have to do something about that. I can't leave the kids with stuff I've bought. And I appreciate everything what you said about that. And they do say it's a trauma response, hoarding. They can say, it can be a trauma response. But I lose my memory really quickly now. It's really annoying. I was thinking last night even that I wondered if by stopping my coping strategies that because I felt really depressed. I know I was depressed about the news and about the diagnosis. I know I went through a stage. It's taken about 6-7 months for me to process it, I think. But I also think I was feeling my feelings. for the first time in a long time because I'd stopped doing stuff. So there's a bit of a double whammy there. Almost, it doesn't feel very nice to stop initially.
Yeah.
But I think I feel more peaceful now. When I speak to people that I used to work with or my supervisor, I can't stay on the phone too long with them. They're so irate. I think, I must have been like that. So, I suppose, is there a question now, or was it just I think it was just a thought as you were speaking around giving yourself tender, loving care and to slow down. You see, I had people around me that couldn't. I was saying I need to slow down, but because they were living such a fast pace, they couldn't tell me how to do it. It was like I was reaching out, trying to get, and nobody knew how to do it because they weren't doing it. So I suppose in some way the tragedy of a cancer diagnosis, if you like, can also be a great blessing for a while anyway. So I think I just wanted to say that was all right.
Oh, no problem at all. What's really interesting here is, again, this demonstrates something really deep. Is that deep down in the world, we have all our coping mechanisms as a way to navigate the world, to be able to function, to be able to have a job, to have a livelihood, everything else. And that's fine, but the problem is we become so caught up in that, and when we're exposed to so many difficulties and so much chaos and so many things happening so quickly all at once, these coping mechanisms become even more important to us. And we have terrible fear in letting them go. And that's when they start to edge more into addiction, when we can't let them go. And at the same time, when they become addictions in particular, when we can't think or function without them, that creates more tension in ourselves because we don't feel free. We feel burdened and imprisoned by these things, and therefore we become frustrated and irate, and we take that tension out on other people because it's a kind of double whammy system. And,
I had great shame about it. I felt shame about the amount of stuff I was buying, and I couldn't tell anybody what I was doing because I felt shame. I thought, they'll think I'm like greedy or gluttonous or something like that. And that was stuff that was haunting.
Well, it's in a way, it's the joy of the shop. That's what we were looking for, wasn't it?
I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it. Got to car boot sales.
Yeah.
It was all right, second-hand stuff. Loved it. Yeah.
And that's the thing. We find joy wherever we can, and that's completely fine. Of course, we feel concerned. Other people might judge us and everything else. But until we find that happiness within, we're going to be looking for happiness and joy wherever we can. And if we can't find it, then we get really depressed, frustrated, upset, bitter, vengeful, destructive, etc., etc. All these things can happen. And then all of a sudden, life, if it can hit us around the face, so to speak, and we get a tragedy, we might have a loss, we might have a terminal illness, we might have something arrive on our doorstep that forces us to stop, that forces us to recalibrate. Now, to be able to stop in that sense is really, in the way that you can sort of find peace in that, is really a blessing. Because for many, many people, they can't do that. That shock to the system is now, it's one thing too many. They cascade out of control because they aren't able to come back to what they're going through. And to have some forgiveness and some peace and some space for what they're going through. And to give themselves a chance to heal. Maybe you will never recover. Maybe it is a terminal thing. But you can still heal your relationship to it and the experience of it. And understand something far more deeply about the human condition, which unfortunately, when we don't give ourselves freedom to do that, it becomes just another prison, another nightmare. So it's a bit like that, isn't it?
Yeah. I think the practice probably helped sort of set me up for the news.
Yeah.
But thank you, Venerable.
You're welcome. It's a thing to think is, what would we have done had this happened to us and we didn't know? If we didn't have any understanding of, that we can practice, we can come back to it. How would we have treated it, these kinds of shocks? Maybe we would have just cascaded and destroyed ourselves and hated ourselves more, and who knows where we could have ended up. That's what's something that's quite miraculous. Yeah.
Thank you, Venerable, for tonight, for the talk and the kind answer to all the questions. So we now come to the ending time. Would you be happy to give us a blessing before we leave?
Yeah, sure thing. So, may you all find your sanctuary. May you all get your lives back by understanding that you never lost it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Venerable.